Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Tuesday, April 21st. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, budgets are more than funding proposals. They tell the workforce and industry what the government values most. Plus, political transitions test how disciplined contractors really are about risk, compliance, and decision-making. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. For perhaps the first time since the Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act became law in 1994, the Office of Management and Budget is holding agencies accountable for how they buy commercial items. What's different now is that OMB wants agencies to prove they're meeting the spirit and intent, not just the letter of the law. For more on how OMB is raising the bar, Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller, joins me now. Jason, thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Terry.
What is the change here? How is OMB holding agencies more accountable for buying commercial items, and what are those?
They're doing a lot of different things over the last year, but in just a new memo released last Friday, just kind of quietly pushed out the door, not in a bad way. It wasn't a news dump or anything, but, memos take time to get out the door. But agencies now have until May 4th to submit data for how they met the requirements under President Donald Trump's executive order for buying commercial items from last April. Now, there's a few different things to this data submission that they're required to do. So let's start with contracts already awarded. So first, agencies have to provide a total value and total number of non-commercial contracts awarded on or after April 15th through September 30th, 2025. They want that by product service code and also to include the list of procurement instrument identifiers, PIIDs, associated with each award. So that's number one. Number two, for any award over $10 million, OMB wants even more data to include the date of the next contract option, any action planned by the senior procurement executive as a result of their review, and an explanation if a shift to a commercial item is not planned for the next contract option, making references to things like market research, price analysis to support that conclusion that a non-commercial solution or item is one that's needed. Now, for contracts not yet awarded, a whole different set of categories. These are acquisitions still in the works. Think of an agency released a solicitation or a task order, but they have not yet made it an award. OMB wants more data. They want the total number of all open, as they call pre-award actions for non-commercial products and services that were in process on or after, again, April 15th, 2025, and were initiated by March 31st, 2026. So it's even longer cycle of data. And if the award's going to be worth more than $10 million, they also have to submit similar data like the description of the requirement, planned contract type, and the government's independent cost estimate, and any review by the senior procurement executive, and any planned action they will take. And again, if you're not going to buy commercial product, OMB wants the SPE's explanation, again, market research and other factors to justify the agency's determination as to why they're going to buy a non-commercial solution. So it's a big data call, and again, only a couple weeks to get it done.
Jason, the executive order came out in April, but agencies probably didn't know exactly what they were going to be asked to collect. How big of a lift is this going to be for providing this data?
Terry, I talked to two separate former federal acquisition leaders. Both said this is going to be a pretty significant data call. Now, OMB is asking for data that many agencies already collect, but there's a difference between collecting them and then getting all that data in, bringing it together. It's going to be time-consuming, difficult to get it in the process where OMB wants it and then submit it to them. Mike Darius is a former senior procurement executive at the State Department. He's now the executive director for the Greg and Camille Baroni Center for Government Contracting at the George Mason University. He believes that maybe OMB got some data initially from agencies post-executive order, and they were not excited for what they saw. And he thinks, maybe that's helping to drive some of these memos' requirements. And in fact, OMB said in the memo in fiscal 2024, more than 2/3 of the total federal contract spending reported by agencies in the federal procurement data system were for non-commercial products and services. Now, OMB says this includes more than $130 billion of non-commercial contracting for common services such as professional support services, IT and telecom services, and operation of facilities. They said much of which was required using cost reimbursement contracts that often allow for undefined deliverables that increase the government's exposure to loss. So they're saying, hey, we looked at the data from at least 2024 and we were not happy with what we saw. Terry also spoke with Julie Dunn, a former commissioner of the Federal Acquisition Service at the General Services Administration. She's also a former Hill staffer that focused on procurement. And she says many agencies now also have smaller acquisition staffs. So trying to manage this new data call is not going to be easy. And again, a lot of this may be something that will take more time to put together. She also thought OMB's comment that 2/3 of the spend in FPDS in 2024 is for non-commercial products, that too was surprising to her. She wonders if there's a bit of a data or description problem of what commercial buying really means. And, the government has struggled with this idea of what is commercial buying. From FASA to memos from OMB to rules from the Federal Acquisition Regulatory Council, all tried to define and explain it. But Dunn, who's now a principal at the Monument Advocacy, says Congress has tried on occasion over the past 20 years to even make this more definition clear. They asked for reports like the Section 809 panel from 2018 that recommended replacing commercial buying and the existing simplified acquisition procedures and thresholds with something they called simplified readily available procedures for procuring readily available products and services, right? This is another mouthful. But basically the panel found that specifically around DoD, they faced confusing terminology, inconsistent definitions and application of inconsistent policies and procedures when it came to commercial buying. So to Julie's point, Terry, there's been a lot talked about over the years, and it's not always clear.
It is clear that this administration wants agencies to buy more commercial products. Beyond this particular data call, how is OMB empowering agency leaders to ensure that programs are doing their best to buy commercial items?
Absolutely. This is something that they're really putting that accountability back on the agencies to say, hey, this is not just us telling you do it, but prove you're doing it and then put the processes and policies in place to, again, go back around to it. Now, OMB is asking senior procurement executives and agency competition advocates to get even more involved in the oversight and review of acquisitions and to know whether commercial products and services can fulfill agencies' requirements. So let's start. First off, competition advocates must be no lower than the head of a contracting activity or a deputy SPE. So again, putting them at a high level in the agency. Among the things that OMB wants the competition advocate to do is to make recommendations to the senior procurement executive on improvements to internal policies and practices to maximize commercial buying. Things like centralizing, collecting, and sharing of market research, supporting efficient commerciality determinations. Another thing the competition advocate should work on is they should get together with the procurement committee on e-government. This is something under the Chief Acquisition Officers Council to review and make appropriate improvements to current data collection protocols associated with tracking acquisitions of commercial products and services in FPDS. Again, this goes back to something Julie Dunn said about maybe there's a data problem or description problem. Now, finally, Dunn says something else that they can do is a lot of this will really push on these agencies to maybe move to show their work more, right? This is not like, okay, we're just doing this. This is proving it. And she believes that maybe OMB is trying to create a bit of a disincentive not to go commercial because they're creating this higher threshold of work that's required. Mike Darrows added that maybe there should be some concerns about the second and third order effects that this memo could have. One could be the broader debate of what really is a commercial product. Terry, a good example is, well, if you have to buy a TV, you can go over to your local Best Buy and buy that TV. Well, but a lot of TVs today have Wi-Fi. And as you know, if you're in a SCIF, you can't really have Wi-Fi. So then you need a TV without Wi-Fi, or you can ensure you disable that Wi-Fi and do it in a way that can never be turned on. That is a good example of a second or third order effect that may be debated. Another effect that Darrows points out is the push to use more best-in-class contracts, BICs as they're called, because these already have met the requirements of commercial products and therefore may be easier to meet the administration's goal. And then finally, Darrows said he wouldn't be surprised if senior procurement executives who are already very busy have smaller acquisition staffs, put some kind of limit, dollar review threshold on top of what OMB is already outlining. There are just too many contracts and not enough time to review every order worth just a few $1,000s or tens of thousands of dollars. So he believes there's a lot more to come from what's already in this memo because implementation, again, we hear this time and again, Terry, when the rubber hits the road, really will tell how much success they can have in this oversight.
That's Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller. Jason, thanks for this story. It sounds like the acquisition teams are going to have their hands full.
Absolutely, and they only have until May 4th to get it all done. Thank you, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, budgets are more than funding proposals. They tell the workforce and industry what the government values most. This is The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.
Tune in Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. for the Innovation in Government Show, sponsored by Carasoft. Hear from the industry leaders advancing the technologies shaping how agencies modernize, secure operations, and deliver better services. Innovation in Government covers what is changing now, what is working from cybersecurity and cloud to data, AI, and emerging technologies. Listen to Innovation in Government, Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. on Federal News Network. Search Innovation in Government.
Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Looking at the president's defense budget request, the story is partly about how much money is there, but it's also about what the administration is asking the Pentagon to lean into. Meanwhile, shutdown-related delays at DHS are testing contractor resilience in real time. Jim Carroll, CEO of the Professional Services Council, joins us to walk through the real-world impacts. Good morning, Jim. It's great to have you back.
Good morning, Terry. It's always great to be back with you.
Well, let's talk about the president's budget. It came out a couple of weeks ago, but people are still perusing it, scouring through it. I know a lot of PSC's members do business with DOD, so let's start there. When you look at the president's 27 budget request for DOD, what do you think the story is that this administration is trying to tell about how it sees the Pentagon's role?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Terry. And I have to say, living my entire life in D.C. and, working in and out of the government and politics and everything, the president's budget request is always a guiding tool. It's not an absolute. And so first off, the top line number is stunning, but it was something that we had been hearing, and I'm sure you had been hearing also for months, that the request was going to come in at 1.5 trillion. And so that number was not a surprise because it had been telegraphed, perhaps intentionally, that this type of request is coming. What it shows, though, is really the laser focus right now on the Pentagon and on Secretary Hegseth and what is happening around the world, for good or for bad, right? We're seeing the support of Ukraine, which appears to be diminishing, at least by some of the open source reporting. But what we have seen is the conflict in Iran has just been very successful, if you will, but also a costly campaign. And we're very proud of our member companies at Professional Services Council that are able to support our warfighters and provide critical intelligence, critical information gathering, and other tools necessary to support the warfighter. But it comes at a price. And so, with a $1.5 trillion request, 1.1 of the $1 trillion is discretionary. And then, what we're hearing also and what we're seeing is $350 billion as a supplemental request through the reconciliation process. And it's a big lift. There's no question about it that this, achieving a 1.5 is a huge lift. But I think also important for everyone to understand is when you bore down in to the request, the PBR, that it shows in very clear terms what is of the most importance to this administration. And one of the things that we heard this from the very beginning days of the administration, Terry, we actually heard it from them during the transition, that the Golden Dome is going to be a major priority. And that is going to cost $17, $20 billion for that effort.
Golden Dome is primarily in the reconciliation portion of the budget request, though. What do you see in the base? Where are the storylines there?
I think what we're seeing are drones, which again, you have to sort of think about the Golden Dome, and what it's showing is that the importance the administration is putting on drones and the ability to counter drones. We've seen them being a critical part of both Ukraine and Russia, and hearing reports of it happening with Iran, Israel, and the drone swarms, which are really, when see some of the video footage of these drone swarms, it's a terrifying, net of offensive weapons that are coming in. The other is something the president talked about quite a bit during his first term, and he's talking about it now, is shipbuilding and the emphasis on acquiring or building ships as fast as possible. And I think that is something we're paying attention to. Some of our member companies at Professional Services Council are very involved in some of the autonomous ships as well, which are really fascinating, which brings to really the conclusion of the role of AI and artificial intelligence. Terry, you could never be replaced by AI. You're way too talented, and our listeners here are performing critical roles that can't be replaced by AI, but we certainly are relying on it. And I bet if we had to poll the hundreds of thousands, millions of listeners to you, Terry, I bet most of them are using AI in some capacity every day, whether it's work related or when they get home and looking for some information when they get home, is the advance of AI. And so I think we'll really continue to see an effort there in that overall $1.5 trillion request, that there'll be some functions, not you, Terry, never you, Terry, but some functions.
I appreciate that, Jim.
Some functions being done by AI faster and more efficiently.
I'm speaking with Jim Carroll. He's CEO of the Professional Services Council. Jim, I want to switch to the other big agency that a lot of your members support, and that's NASA. NASA is basically facing a flat budget through 2030 in this budget submission. In practical terms, what does that mean they have to choose between?
I think, like most Americans, I'm still riding high from Artemis 2. Everything from the launch to waiting what seemed like a really long time to get them out of that capsule when it was floating. What an amazing sight that is, and it shows the leadership of the United States. So much of that work was done by the members of Professional Services Council, pscouncil.org, and the role that they played, and so we're very excited for our members. So many of our members were down there watching it, supporting it. But the budget is interesting. And again, it's directional. One thing that I would keep in mind with this, even though it is flat, the White House, we know does want to continue to support, funding, especially the International Space Station. Some of the research that takes place is very exciting. I would mention that the administrator, Jared Isaacman, who really is just an amazing person, and he himself is an astronaut, as you know, he has talked about insourcing some of the functions to bring it back inside NASA. Without an additional budget request, I'm not sure how he can do that. So we'll continue to play a role in supporting Administrator Isaacman's goal. And it is to be commended what everyone is doing in this community to support this. Terry, I know our time is limited. I wanted to mention real quickly, while we're excited to support the new Secretary of DHS, Terry, we're working hard in an issue there, and this is breaking news for you, Terry, that we're a little bit concerned about the shutdown at DHS impacting payments to some of our member companies. They have performed work, they have done the work, they have paid their employees, but they're not getting the reimbursement. And our concern is that with the DHS shutdown, that there aren't people in seats to be able to process and approve the payment. So it's not an issue with the work itself, it's the shutdown. And so we're going to be working with the Hill. We've contacted the White House, and we'll be working, of course, with DHS, where we have many good friends, to understand this, to support our members of Professional Services Council to get them paid. And so that's a critical issue this week that we've already hit the ground running. That sadly, we think the shutdown is now causing another negative impact for Americans.
Jim, we heard some testimony from DHS leaders a week or so ago about those impacts. The Commandant of the Coast Guard testified that they weren't able to pay their electrical bills. Give us some other examples of the payments that you're talking about that are being delayed.
Well, I mean, really, it's for anything. It's for services rendered. It's for people that are there. It's some of the technology products that our member companies are delivering, and really expertise that the DHS does not have internally. We're talking about so they're supplemented with contractors. We're talking about advanced screening for overseas packages coming in. We're concerned, the impact that it might have as people are coming back from international travel, and the ability to quickly process people through. Thankfully, we have some members of Professional Services Council that are actually working and manning some of the entry points instead of TSA. They're doing a phenomenal job. We've got to get these people paid, though. So we supplement DHS in every component, whether it's our friends at the United States Coast Guard, Semper Paratus, those folks there, or whether it's some of the other missions, they need to get back, and we're, God willing, DHS is going to get up and running.
So what are you hoping your conversations this week will result in? Are there particular off-ramps that you're hoping to negotiate?
What we're hoping to do is, the bottom line is, how can we get these payments processed faster? What can we do to support that? If Congress cannot fund DHS, how can we get these payments, these reimbursements made, so that these companies can continue to survive? And that's, what we're talking about is the survival here. If they're not getting paid, eventually, it becomes a very serious issue. And just like the Coast Guard is having trouble paying their electric bill, the same is true. Unless they're paying these contractors, it's going to present a true bottom line effort. And so again, we think it's just a processing problem, that there's not a butt in seat, excuse my language, to process that payment. So if we can get at least those functions temporarily moved so that people can get paid, that would be a wonderful outcome. And so that's what we're working on in addition this week.
I've been speaking with Jim Carroll. He's the CEO of the Professional Services Council. Jim, thanks as always. We'll keep our fingers crossed for your success.
Thank you. Same with you, Terry. Have a great week.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, sometimes even a solid argument isn't enough to save a bid protest. But first, political transitions test how disciplined contractors really are about risk, compliance, and decision-making. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Periods immediately after an election are often defined less by new rules than by unanswered questions. For government contractors, that uncertainty can create real legal, contractual, and operational risk long before policies change. Joining me to talk about how contractors can prepare now for political transitions without overcorrecting is partner at Jenner & Block, David Robbins. Mr. Robbins, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
You've issued an article with some warnings to government contractors about preparing for this year's midterm election environment. Let's start at the top there. What are the big things that contractors should be concerned about?
We have been so used to one-party control of government and the way of doing things that it can be a little jarring when party control changes. And in the midterms, you've got to prepare for what happens if at least the House, or maybe even the Senate, changes party hands. If passed as prologue, there will be congressional investigations into government contractors, maybe less so about the government contractors themselves, but more about the federal programs upon which the contractors work. And that creates some risk for the community.
Talk a little bit more about what kind of risks you see.
The risks are generally reputational. The risks can also include to the customer relationship, because these congressional investigations, to the extent party control changes, to the extent congressional investigations begin, can be focused on scoring political points as much as they can be focused on gathering facts. So your performance is one component of this, but also the program you're supporting is another. And so you've got to protect both your company and your customer relationship and the good work you've been able to do. Those are the key risks.
Your article actually describes some areas of particular risk for contractors who've maybe been working on some of the Trump administration's top priorities. Can you give us some examples?
I sure can. And this is not necessarily partisan or party specific. Anytime it changes, priorities of any given administration can be at risk. But mass deportations, data gathering, privacy issues, any number of the more sensitive projects going on can become fodder for congressional hearings.
One of the points that you make in your article is that contractors can't just wait for clarity. They have to start preparing now. And so regardless of which policy direction ultimately takes hold, what are the steps that you recommend folks begin to take and think about now?
I think there are three general buckets. Now, we talk in the article about certain frameworks, certain pillars, but three general buckets. The first is monitor performance. Make sure you're doing a good job. Make sure you have records showing that you're doing a good job and you're meeting the government's requirements of you, because there's only so much a company can control when they're asked to do certain things by the government. Second is build relationships. It doesn't really matter who's in control. If there are sensitive programs that a given contractor is working on, that could be the subject of inquiries later. It never hurts to make friends now, to explain yourself now, to frame the issues, to tell your story now. And the third bucket really is to tighten up on internal documentation. A contract file is vitally important. How do you prove what you've done? How do you prove the limits of what you've done? And not to get overly legalistic, but there are certain defenses you can bring to bear on your behalf in the government contracts community. If you are instructed cleanly and clearly to take certain tasks by the government, that requires a clean documentary record to be able to prove these defenses exist. That may not be the silver bullet to PR risk of a congressional hearing, but if you can trot out documents that say, here is our instruction, we had no choice, this is what we're required to do by our customer, it can only help.
So you're really advising the compliance departments to get active.
The compliance department is a good component of it. I think that point is a little broader than the one I was just making, which is just make sure the contract file is tight. The compliance role is make sure we're acting with appropriate integrity and appropriate business honesty. Are there internal controls, reporting avenues? Are problems taken a look at, investigated, and taken seriously, even if they turn out to be nothing? That's an important prophylactic step for any contractor, but having a robust compliance program can only help tell your story.
I'm speaking with David Robbins. He's a partner at Jenner & Block. Mr. Robbins, the article goes on to describe a strategic framework with 5 pillars. Walk us through, at a fairly high level, what those pillars are.
And we talked about some of it a little bit earlier. The first pillar we call build the legal record now. That's the documentary support of what you were asked to do, when, and how. It's better to tell your story with documents than to just do it by narrative. It's harder to dispute a documentary record. The second one we touched on a little bit earlier, we call perform impeccably, and document that too. Make sure you're doing a good job. People may quibble with what you're asked to do, but if you're doing a good job and under budget or on time, that can only help you. Our third pillar, again, we talked about it a moment ago, is harden that ethics and compliance program. For all the reasons we just discussed, it helps you tell your story that you're performing ethically, honestly, openly, and I personally believe it inures to the benefit of a company overall, including to the bottom line. The fourth one, well, this gets a little more technical. This is consider your legal defenses, consider your acquisition defenses. What can you bring to bear if people really start to push? That requires more involvement of lawyers, the Office of General Counsel, and capable, we like to say, outside counsel. The last one is to really think hard about your congressional engagement strategy. That includes lawyers, that may include lobbyists, that may include PR talent. It depends on how much you want to reach out. The key is to build relationships. Knowing the core committees of cognizance over your company and your business, whether that's Homeland Security, whether that's House Oversight, whether that's anything else, right? Having those relationships in advance, if you expect an inquiry at the staff level, can only help you frame questions, tell your story, and prevent perhaps the most damaging PR risk.
That sounds like very practical advice, but it also sounds to me, as someone who's not in the private sector, as a lot of overhead. Is this an issue that contractors of every size need to worry about, or is it really just the big primes that need to prepare for this? How would you coach contractors of varying sizes to take on and think about that framework?
I think we start by what programs are various companies working on. If they are politically sensitive, and you're going to know what that is, right? If it's in the news, if it's the subject of protests, it's worth the ounce of prevention. Now, I'm not saying everybody needs the platinum-plated program. That's not our purpose here today. These are the pillars you got to consider. Plussing up an internal record, looking at the ethics and compliance program, that can be done with existing resources. It just requires some focused attention. Where it can get expensive is if you have to hire on congressional relations specialists, and that requires a close and careful look at potential risk.
How do those guidelines filter down to the folks on the front lines in these organizations? It sounds like, in a way, we're talking about the back office and the senior leader folks, but there are people on the ground dealing with their government counterparts every day. What do they need to be thinking about?
I think it goes to, part of it is the proverbial Washington Post test, right? Is what you're doing comfortable for you? Are you being asked to do something you're uncomfortable about? That's where the internal instruction to just speak up and ask questions and seek help comes into play. You can keep your customer happy. We all want to satisfy our customers in this arena, right? But you can keep your customer happy while having reach back support. It's just uncomfortable to be the lone person making a decision of consequence without some help from your internal organization. That's what I would tell the frontline people. If you get uncomfortable, ask.
There's a fine line here between preparing for change and maybe overcorrecting too early. Where do you most often see contractors misjudge that balance?
Right now, this really is a matter of preparation and relationship building. So I would suggest contractors need to think hard about overt, early engagement. Staff relationships on committees, always helpful. Engagement with members, well, you want to take a good, hard look and engage some help of some seasoned professionals to make that determination.
And then if you step back, again, as we're thinking about what could be a very tumultuous election cycle, what does resilience look like for contractors who are operating through these kinds of political transitions?
Resilience looks like the ability to continue to perform the mission and adapt to changes as they come. It is capability amid modification, amid changes in scope, and the ability to reach back to your contracts professionals to modify what you're doing in a legal and compliant manner.
I'm sure that many of the big primes have lots of experience working through these kinds of transitions, but how is that resilience you just described different from reacting to the headlines?
I think the difference is one of mindset. The difference is one of controlling the narrative and standing for something. We stand for compliant performance. We stand for serving our customer, but making sure we're doing it within the framework we're required in the contract versus waiting and lurching and overcorrecting. It may sound like one of degree, but in my government days, I'm a former Air Force General Counsel's office lawyer, I saw thousands of cases where things went wrong, and to me, it makes a tremendous difference.
I've been speaking with David Robbins. He's a partner at Jenner & Block. Mr. Robbins, thanks so much for joining me today.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, sometimes even a solid argument isn't enough to save a bid protest. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The Court of Federal Claims agreed that the Navy mishandled affiliate past performance in a major procurement, then rejected the protest on procedural grounds. The noblest decision is a cautionary tale about record discipline, expert evidence, and the limits of post hoc fixes. Here to walk us through the case is Zach Prince, partner at Haynes Boone. Zach, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
Tell us about this noblest protest case and why it landed at the Court of Federal Claims.
Sure. So this decision was about an approximately $100 million procurement by the Navy for engineering, technical, and programmatic services to support computer systems and networking for Program Management Warfare 160, PMW 160, tactical networks as part of the CANES Command and Control Program. This was a best value procurement. The Navy essentially evaluated both the awardee, Salute, and Noblest, the protester, as equivalent in all factors except cost, where Salute just barely edged Noblest out by about $7 million out of $109 million, rather. So the Navy awarded to Salute. Noblest protested first to GAO, lost, and then brought this case to the court.
The core issue in this case seemed to circle around past performance. So walk us through what the behaviors were that led to the protest?
Sure. So past performance is somewhat of a vexing issue in many procurements, and it's never been entirely clear to me when your corporate affiliate, parent, subcontractor past performance will be considered or won't when the rules are otherwise silent in the solicitation. And some of the solicitation is very clear when it will and when it won't. The FAR is a bit ambiguous. The case law has been a bit scattered, and that was a helpful hook for Nobles here.
Tell me more about why they went that angle.
So Judge Solemson here goes through a lengthy explanation of the different categories for consideration of related parties and subcontractor past performance. And it's very helpful to have this laid out as a framework. So he explains that there are four different possibilities. There is a total exclusion, where the solicitation just says expressly, no, you can't use subcontractor or affiliate past performance. It's only the contractor's past performance. That's clear. It doesn't, to me, make very much sense when you've got teammates that you are, in fact, expressly relying on for their technical expertise, and you call it out in the in your proposal. But it's a possibility. Sometimes the agencies select it. You have to live with it or challenge it in advance or risk waiving that challenge. Permutation 2 is limited credit. The solicitation might say, yes, you can use subcontractor and affiliate past performance, but it might restrict reliance on that past performance or corporate experience for evaluation credit to some extent. It might say that you only get a certain amount of credit or define in some way what that credit looks like. And we've seen that show up in a number of protests, and this decision helpfully goes through some of those decisions. Number 3 would be a committed teaming arrangement. The solicitation might permit use of subcontractor affiliate past performance, allow consideration by the agency, but require proof that the offeror is actually entered into some sort of agreement that demonstrates how the affiliate will be used. A teaming arrangement would be one type of scenario, or a subcontract, clear subcontract with terms, is something to that extent where you clearly are explaining what you're doing with the subcontractor or teammate. And the fourth category, which is where we are here, is the default. As the solicitation is silent about affiliate and subcontractor past performance, either how the agency will consider it or what an offeror has to demonstrate to obtain credit for it. And then the default rule, as Judge Solemson explains, is that the agency can consider the experience so long as there's an explanation of how they're going to be used. That is, you can't just say, we get credit because they are affiliates or because they're subcontractors. You explain, this is how we'll use our subcontractors, this is how we'll use our affiliates, and why it's reasonable to rely on it. Here, the issue was it was a silent solicitation about this issue. The agency relied on Salute's affiliate past performance, but there was no explanation of how Salute, the actual contractor entity here, would be able to draw on the parent entity's personnel. And that was fatal for the analysis from the Navy.
So Nobles actually succeeded in their argument about the past performance consideration, correct?
They did, and they lost in a couple other points, and they had lost on this point before GAO, but they did convince Judge Solemson with a fairly complicated but ultimately successful argument. But, there's a big but, it was a Pyrrhic victory.
So tell me more about how, if they were right, they still lost.
Yeah, this is so galling, and I don't know how this happened. But one of the big issues in a federal procurement dispute is that even if you are successful, you have to explain why, and there's a 4-factor test, the court should issue a permanent injunction against the actions of the government. That is, why is it in the public interest that in this case, the court has to tell the government how it must act in a procurement? And they just didn't do that here. Nobles completely failed. I don't know what happened. I haven't studied the briefing, but I do know Judge Solemson. He certainly wouldn't make this up. They did not do an adequate job or seemingly any real job of explaining why the balance of equities or any of the other factors of that test fall in their favor.
Would those sorts of arguments be presented simultaneous with the argument for injunctive relief? I mean, are they two parts of the same case, or are they sequential?
It's part of the same argument. So what you would do, you put it into your complaint, right, which initiates the pleadings at the court. You might amend that complaint later. Parties are not always great at doing that in bid protests because things move so quickly, but ideally that's what you would do. And then you put it in your briefing, your motion for judgment on the administrative record, your MJAR. And you would explain first in detail why you win, and then you would explain in detail why, because of these errors in the procurement, the court, based on the 4 factors for permanent injunctive relief, ought to grant that relief. I've seen cases that lose on the injunctive relief point, even when they win on the merits. It's rare, but the government will successfully argue that for national security interests or some other reason, the public interest is in favor of letting this thing ride, even though there is an error.
It seems then that there might be 2 sets of lessons that we draw from this case. One is about the reliance on affiliate or subsidiary past performance in their proposals. How should contractors think about the lesson out of this case for that consideration?
Yeah, this is an important point because I see this a lot, especially with platforms of companies where they're all related, they're all under common ownership. They think of themselves as one entity. They're not one entity. The contractor's identity matters. And Judge Solomson here talks about this notion of privity of contract. That is, there is a contract between the government, or will be, the government and a single legal entity, right? That legal entity is the one who's on the hook if there's an issue. It's the one that gets paid by the government. And that entity is not indistinguishable from its various corporate affiliates. And there are meaningful legal distinctions there. So if you're proposing and assuming that you can rely on all the capabilities and past performance of other legal entities, even if you absolutely can, you have to make sure you're showing the agency why that's the case. And corporate form matters. I've seen some really sticky legal issues arise because of this issue. Companies just treat entities as indistinguishable when they legally are in fact separate. You can't do that. And of course, the same is true for subcontractors, right, which are not affiliates.
The second lesson set seems to me to be for the lawyers and how they prepare the case.
Yeah, it is. And it's a painful case to talk about because Noblest had good legal counsel, folks who are well known and respected in the industry, which I think just emphasizes that this can happen to anybody. Don't get lazy. Briefing deadlines are real, life intrudes, but if you miss something central like this, you will lose a whole case for your client. And I can't imagine how that call went with Noblest. You win, but sorry, you lose because of this prejudicial error that we made.
What about the lesson for agency contracting shops? How should they think about this and the clarity that best suits a solicitation?
Yeah, they just need to draft coherent solicitation terms. And past performance becomes an issue that is disputed almost every time in a protest. And sometimes it is a matter of discretion and you're challenging an agency's reasoned determination. But sometimes it's the case that the solicitation just should have been clear. And either the agency needs to say, yes, we do want to think about your affiliate or your subcontractor past performance, and this is how you go ahead and submit it, or not. But they can't just say past performance is an evaluation factor and then just throw up their hands and let things play out.
Zach Prince is partner with Haynes Boone. Zach, thanks so much for joining me and walking us through this case. Important lessons here.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. The challenge of delivering capabilities to warfighters at a faster rate is hardly a new problem for the Defense Department. But with the rise of artificial intelligence and cloud services, there may be no better opportunity to shift the timetable and accelerate delivery. For more on how the Marine Corps is cutting down the time it takes to deliver capabilities, Federal News Network's executive editor Jason Miller talked to David Raley, the Chief Digital Business Officer of the Marine Corps Community Services, about a platform that is cutting down the time to delivery to as little as 15 minutes.
Operation Stormbreaker, for our own organization, for Marine Corps Community Services, we were choked by the same two things. The most visible thing is that ATO process. People see that as this kind of like, it's really like a tip of an iceberg with a lot of other underlying problems, but that's what's most obvious because you're delayed because we don't have an ATO. So we were experiencing those same set of bottlenecks in our organization. So back in the early 2020 into 2021, started addressing that problem. We built a greenfield capability, cloud native enclave to support this modernization effort for our own organization. Following all the DOW CIO guidance for CATO, DevSecOps, and all kind of the modern things, and mirroring ourselves to the highest degree we can with both commercial technology and commercial support and commercial best practices in modern ways to actually deliver software. And fast forward all the way to the end, we now have a mature technically and cybersecurity and compliance platform that allows us to deliver workloads into production within 15 minutes with an authorization. And so that's the time compression we're talking about, going from spending 12 to 18 months. And furthermore, I was really pleased to see the outgoing DON CIO last year issue a memorandum around all development done in containerization and all the other guidance, the acting DOW CIO, Ms. Arrington, and her Swift Software Initiative and the blowing up RMF, all those things oriented around the same exact problem, Jason, that you've been talking about, right? Which is how do you actually capability enhance the warfighter at the speed of relevance? And at the speed of relevance, 15 minutes is probably getting pretty close to that. What we have to also do is support and reduce the risk from a security and especially from a security and compliance perspective related to experimentation and innovation. And so Stormbreaker specifically supports that as well, because when you're leveraging CI/CD pipelines and you're doing agile development and you can build and release even multiple times a day with a new authorization each time you do it through an automated process, now we're talking about how you can actually support that warfighter requirement to increase those cycle times. Our adversaries are not constrained by some of the things that we have constrained ourselves by, and they have ability to deliver much faster cycle times outcomes. So we need to be in front of that curve of that. And my dream would be that Operation Stormbreaker, the model of it, what it's doing, and there's other platforms across the Department of War that are doing the same thing, would be ubiquitously available to a mission owner so that they don't have to suffer through those agonizing components of trying to find a hosting environment, trying to figure out how to go through the acquisition piece, and suffer from those legacy compliance practices that just take multiple years.
Appreciate the background and kind of setting up what Operation Stormbreaker is trying to achieve. Let me maybe take a half a step back on a couple things. So you set up this cloud environment. Operation Stormbreaker is a service that you are providing other folks across the Marine Corps, the Navy, and DoD if they want it. Talk a little bit about how that works. Folks can bring, and it's a platform, but folks can bring their applications to live on the platform. Walk me through that process too.
We had such a high degree of success in our own organization building this capability, and because, as is very often when you have the right modern architectures built on cloud, you have scalability. And so we quickly determined, this was kind of early last year, and we started to offer this platform and authorization as a service to other components across the Department of War, as you described. And what this looks like is we abstract away from the mission owner and their vendor, if they're using a vendor to deploy the application, all of the underlying platform work, the actual management of the security of the platform, and the ATO process. And we provide all of that as a service. And I think that's fairly unique across the Department of War, having a platform team being able to provide that holistically end to end. It's almost like a white glove, all-inclusive type of service. So if you're a mission owner with no interest or capacity in cybersecurity or underlying infrastructure and things like that to support an application, but you have the need to quickly acquire some commercial technology, as an example, an application to run, and you need a place to host an ATO, that's what Stormbreaker is specifically designed for. And we've now evolved a little bit. So the journey was we built this internally within our IT shop to satisfy our own needs. But because of its thing is we're actually pulling it out, it's become a business unit And my anchor tenant is my own organization that has a bunch of workloads, but I'm now expanding and have multiple external customers, as you described, across supporting a few things out of DIU, which is really exciting for us, and then also with the Navy and the Marine Corps.
I was going to get to that in a second as well. Who else are some of your customers? Where are you at today? I also want to touch upon this idea of this white glove all-inclusive service. And you'd said, listen, if you're a mission owner and you don't have the underlying infrastructure or maybe don't have the capacity to say, can we get this through the ATO process? They can just come in and say to you, David, all right, we have this application that collects data from the edge, brings it back, runs it through the AI machine thingamabob, and then it helps us make decisions faster. They can just put that application on your platform and inherit like 80% of the controls or some high percentage of controls.
85.
Go ahead.
Yeah, 85.
85% of the controls.
Yeah.
And that's the decrease in time you're talking about. That's that speed.
No, that's not all of it. That's a part of it. And that's fairly common to say we have a landing zone. That's a technical term, where you actually have a tiered control inheritance enclave that supports the 85%. It's far deeper than that. So let me see if I can describe it in kind of simple terms. First, we'll start with its shared responsibilities model. So there are certain responsibilities that the platform team has when it comes to security controls and the authorization piece. We drive it, we manage it, we have all the requisite security and compliance staff that you might expect, ISMs and security control assessors and validator teams, and we fall under the Marine Corps' primary AO, Dr. Corbin. So we have that full, and that's provided as a service. The mission owner does not have to go and get their compliance people involved. So we leverage our own and provide that as a service. Secondly, the speed that I'm talking about is we focused. So as you mentioned, we have to look at the 15% delta, right? So the underlying enclave is going to provide the 85%. The mission owner is going to be responsible for that 15. Still, we support that process. Most of that looks like the actual security of the code, the software bill of materials, vulnerabilities that you have in it, or checking for secrets and other things like that. That process, to meet those requirements, we go through the code build process for container builds in our CI/CD pipeline, and through automation, we achieve the security or give feedback to the engineer team on what areas they may have issues, vulnerabilities, etc. So they'll push a build through the pipeline, get feedback within minutes, make the adjustments and do the remediation, push it back through and test it again. So it becomes somewhat of a self-service model from an ATO perspective, where they can achieve authorization once they can get through that pipeline, and then we release that into production. So that's where that 15 minutes comes from. So you position engineers and application teams to come in, and they have a place to experiment and play around that's secure. I don't really care how production ready your code is from an operational perspective. It could be a proof of concept, it could be an MVP, doesn't matter. Are you getting it through and getting it production ready from a security perspective? That's our role as a platform team, to support you. So that's where that speed comes from, and then that ability to support innovation and everything else. And it's also meeting the lofty goals that the Department of War has had for years on shifting cyber left.
David Raley is the Chief Digital Business Officer of the Marine Corps Community Services. Listen and watch his full interview from Federal News Network's DoD Modernization Exchange on demand anytime on federalnewsnetwork.com. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.